Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a time before time itself existed. Before the sun rose and set, before the stars twinkled in the night sky, before the earth beneath our feet had taken shape. In this primordial darkness, in this absolute nothingness, there was only chaos, a yawning void, an endless abyss of confusion and formlessness. This is where our journey begins, in the very beginning of everything, at the birth of the universe according to ancient Greek mythology. The stories we're about to explore together aren't just tales from a distant past. They're the foundation of Western civilization, the bedrock upon which countless works of art, literature, philosophy, and even our modern understanding of human nature have been built. These myths have survived for nearly 3,000 years, passed down from generation to generation, first through oral tradition by wandering poets and storytellers, then captured in the immortal verses of Homer and Hesiod, and finally preserved in countless manuscripts that have survived the ravages of time. Picture yourself in ancient Greece, perhaps sitting around a fire on a cool evening in Athens or Sparta, listening to a traveling bard weave these tales of gods and heroes. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and in those shadows you might almost see the mighty Zeus hurling his thunderbolts, or the beautiful Aphrodite emerging from the sea foam, or brave Achilles charging into battle. These stories weren't just entertainment for the ancient Greeks. They were explanations for natural phenomena, moral lessons wrapped in adventure, and a way to understand humanity's place in the cosmos. The mythology of ancient Greece represents one of humanity's most elaborate and influential attempts to make sense of the world. Long before science could explain thunder as electrical discharge or earthquakes as tectonic movement, the Greeks saw these phenomena as the actions of powerful, immortal beings who lived above the clouds on Mount Olympus. When lightning split the sky, it was Zeus expressing his anger. When the sea raged with storms, it was Poseidon striking the waters with his mighty trident. When spring arrived after winter's cold grip, it was Persephone returning from the underworld to her mother Demeter. But these weren't just simple nature stories. The Greek myths are populated with characters of incredible complexity. Gods who, despite their immortality and power, displayed all too human emotions like jealousy, love, rage, and pettiness. Heroes who possessed extraordinary strength or cunning, yet were brought low by their own pride or fate. Monsters that represented humanity's deepest fears and challenges that tested the limits of mortal capability. Each story interwoven with the next, creating a vast tapestry of interconnected tales that span from the creation of the cosmos to the establishment of the great city-states of classical Greece. As we embark on this journey through Greek mythology, we'll witness cosmic battles that determine the fate of the universe, follow heroes on quests that would define the meaning of courage and honor, and explore the complex relationships between mortals and immortals that shape the ancient world's understanding of justice, love, and destiny. These aren't just dusty old stories locked away in museum archives. They're living narratives that continue to influence our culture today, from the language we speak to the stories we tell in our movies, books, and television shows. Let's begin at the very beginning, with that primordial void called chaos. According to Hesiod's Theogony, our most complete ancient source for the creation myth, chaos wasn't quite what we modern people think of when we hear that word. It wasn't disorder or confusion in our sense, but rather a gaping emptiness, a yawning chasm of nothingness. It was the absence of everything, no earth, no sky, no sea, no light, no darkness as we understand it. Just an infinite, formless void waiting to be filled. From this chaos, seemingly of their own accord, emerged the first primordial deities. First came Gaia, the earth herself, broad-bosomed and firm, destined to be the foundation of all that would come. She didn't emerge as a person walking around, but as the very ground itself, the solid matter that would provide a stage for all future existence. Gaia was followed by Tartarus, the dark abyss that would lie far beneath the earth, a prison so deep that an anvil dropped from heaven would fall for 9 days before reaching the earth, and another 9 days before hitting the bottom of Tartarus. This terrifying depth would later serve as the ultimate prison for defeated titans and the worst of mortal sinners. Then came Eros, not the cherubic Cupid of later Roman mythology, but a primordial force of attraction and procreation, the power that would drive all future creation through desire and union. Without Eros, the cosmos would have remained static, for it was desire and attraction that would cause the primordial beings to interact, to create, to bring forth the magnificent and terrible pantheon of Greek mythology. Some accounts also mention Erebus, the personification of darkness, and Nyx, the night herself, emerging from chaos around this time. These primordial beings weren't quite gods as we typically imagine them. They were more like personifications of fundamental concepts and forces: earth, abyss, love, darkness, night. They existed in a strange space between abstract concepts and actual beings with will and consciousness. Gaia, however, quickly showed that she was more than just dirt and stone. She had will, desire, and the power to create. Without a partner, through parthenogenesis, Gaia brought forth Uranos, the sky. Imagine the earth itself giving birth to the heavens, the solid ground beneath creating the infinite dome above. Uranos emerged as a perfect match for Gaia, stretching himself across her entire surface, a starry heaven that would be the roof of the world. She also gave birth to the mountains, the Urea and Pontus, the fruitless sea, all without a mate, demonstrating her incredible generative power. But it was the union of Gaia and Uranos that would truly populate the cosmos with its first real inhabitants. Their coupling was constant. Uranos lay with Gaia every night, covering her completely, and from their union came 3 distinct groups of children. First were the 12 titans, 6 males and 6 females, powerful beings who would become the first true pantheon of gods. These included Oceanus, the river that encircled the earth; Hyperion, the light of heaven; Kronos, the youngest and craftiest; Rhea, who would become the mother of the Olympians; Themis, divine law personified; and Mnemosyne, memory itself. The second group of children were the 3 Cyclopes, not the crude, savage creatures that Odysseus would later encounter, but divine craftsmen of incredible skill. Brontes, whose name means thunder; Steropes, lightning; and Argus, bright. These one-eyed giants would later forge Zeus's thunderbolts, Poseidon's trident, and Hades' cap of invisibility, the weapons that would allow the Olympians to overthrow the Titans. Their single eye represented their focused dedication to their craft, their ability to see only the work before them. The third and most terrible group were the Hecaton Chires, or hundred-handed ones. Cottus, Briareos, and Gyges each possessed 50 heads and 100 arms, making them beings of almost incomprehensible power and terrifying appearance. They would prove to be living weapons of mass destruction, capable of throwing mountains like pebbles, 100 at a time. But here's where our story takes its first dark turn. Uranos looked upon his children, particularly the Cyclopes and the Hecaton Chires, and was filled with disgust and fear. Perhaps he saw in their strength a threat to his supremacy, or perhaps their monstrous appearance offended his celestial sensibilities. Whatever the reason, as each of these children was born, Uranos pushed them back into Gaia's womb, imprisoning them within the earth itself. Can you imagine the pain of a mother unable to give birth, her children trapped within her, growing larger and stronger but unable to emerge into the light? Gaia groaned under this burden, both physical and emotional. Her body ached from containing these powerful beings, and her heart raged against Uranos for his cruelty. In her pain and anger, she conceived a plan. Deep within herself, she created adamantine, a divine metal of incredible strength, and from it fashioned a great sickle, its blade curved and sharp enough to cut even a god. She then called upon her Titan children, the ones Uranus had allowed to roam free, and made them an offer that would change the cosmos forever. The rise of the Titans and the fall of Uranus. Gaia gathered her Titan children in secret, away from the all-seeing eyes of Uranus, who covered the sky. In hushed tones, filled with the pain of a mother's suffering and the rage of eons of abuse, she presented her plan. She showed them the adamantine sickle, its blade gleaming with deadly purpose even in the darkness of their secret meeting place. "My children," she said, her voice the rumble of earthquakes barely contained. "Your father has become a tyrant. He has imprisoned your brothers unjustly, caused me endless pain, and rules through fear rather than love. Which of you has the courage to stand against him?" The Titans looked at one another, fear evident in their immortal eyes. To stand against Uranus was to challenge the very sky itself, the supreme ruler of all that existed. Oceanus, eldest of the Titans, turned away, unwilling to raise his hand against his father. Hyperion, bright and bold though he was, found his light dimming at the thought of such a deed. One by one, the Titans showed their reluctance, their fear of Uranus overwhelming even their love for their suffering mother. All except one. Kronos, the youngest of the Titans, stepped forward. He was different from his brothers. Where they were straightforward in their nature, he was cunning, crafty, called by the ancients crooked scheming Kronos. He took the sickle from his mother's hands, feeling its weight, testing its edge. "Mother," he said, "I will do this deed. Father deserves no respect, for he has shown none to his family. Tell me your plan, and I will see it done." Gaia's plan was as simple as it was brutal. She knew Uranus's routine, how every night he would descend from his heights to lie with her, covering her completely in darkness. She instructed Kronos to hide in ambush, to wait for that moment when Uranus was most vulnerable, lost in his passion, and then to strike with the adamantine sickle. It would be a deed of violence that would echo through eternity, the first overthrow of power in the cosmos, setting a precedent that would haunt Greek mythology forever. As night fell and Uranus descended as he always did, spreading himself across Gaia in an embrace that covered the entire earth, Kronos waited in his hiding place, the sickle gripped tightly in his hand. At the moment when Uranus was most distracted, Kronos burst from his concealment and, with one swift, terrible motion, castrated his father with the adamantine blade. The scream that tore from Uranus shook the very foundations of existence, a sound of pain, betrayal, and rage that would never be forgotten. The severed genitals of Uranus flew through the air, and Kronos, in his triumph and perhaps his disgust, flung them far out to sea. Where the blood fell upon the earth, new beings sprang into existence. The giants, massive and powerful, destined to one day challenge the gods themselves. The Erinyes, or Furies, terrible goddesses of vengeance with snakes for hair and blood dripping from their eyes, who would forever punish those who committed crimes against family. And the Meliae, ash-tree nymphs, who would become the mothers of the bronze race of humanity. But the most remarkable birth came from where the severed parts fell into the sea. The divine flesh mixed with the sea foam, and from this union arose a figure of incomparable beauty. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, born fully grown and perfect. She arose from the waves near the island of Cyprus, and where she stepped ashore, flowers bloomed and grass grew beneath her feet. It's a strange irony that from such a violent act came the goddess of love. But perhaps it speaks to the Greek understanding that beauty and violence, love and pain, are often intertwined. Uranus, mutilated and defeated, retreated to the highest reaches of the sky, where he would remain forever, separated from Gaia by his own pain and humiliation. But as he withdrew, he pronounced a terrible curse upon Kronos. "You think yourself clever, my treacherous son. But mark my words, as you have overthrown me, so shall you be overthrown by your own child. This is the curse of power, that it must always fear what comes after. With Uranos defeated and withdrawn, Kronos assumed the throne of the cosmos, becoming the king of the Titans and ruler of all that existed. He took his sister Rhea as his queen, and together they ushered in what the Greeks would later call the Golden Age. During this time, humans, for they had been created, though the stories differ on exactly how and when, lived in a paradise-like state. There was no need for laws because everyone did what was right naturally. The earth gave forth food without cultivation, spring was eternal, and rivers flowed with milk and nectar. Death, when it came, was like falling into a peaceful sleep. And afterward, these golden race humans became benevolent spirits who watched over the earth. Kronos ruled from Mount Orthrus, and under his leadership, the Titans took dominion over various aspects of the cosmos. Oceanus and his wife Tethys presided over the great river that encircled the earth and all freshwater sources. Hyperion and Thea governed celestial lights, becoming the parents of Helios, the sun, Selene, the moon, and Eos, the dawn. Coeus and Phoebe controlled the axis of heaven, the pole around which the constellations revolved, and became associated with prophecy and intellect. Iapetus, who would father Prometheus, Atlas, and Epimetheus, became associated with mortality and the lifespan of mortals. But even in this golden age, the seeds of future conflict were being sown. Kronos had not freed his imprisoned brothers, the Cyclopes and Hecaton Kyres, despite his mother's wishes. Like his father before him, he feared their power and kept them locked in Tartarus, now adding chains to ensure they could never escape. Gaia, disappointed in her son's betrayal of her trust, began to turn against him. Moreover, the curse of Uranos haunted Kronos' dreams. Every night he would wake in cold sweat, remembering his father's words, seeing in shadows the figure of an unknown son who would one day cast him down as he had cast down Uranos. This paranoia began to consume Kronos, changing him from a liberator into a tyrant, perhaps even worse than his father. Where Uranos had imprisoned his monstrous children, Kronos would go even further in his attempts to avoid his fate. When Rhea bore their first child, Hestia, goddess of the hearth, Kronos looked upon the baby and saw not a daughter to cherish, but a potential threat to his power. In an act that horrified even the other Titans, he seized the infant and swallowed her whole. Rhea stood in shock, unable to comprehend what she had just witnessed. Her husband, the liberator who had freed them from Uranos' tyranny, had just devoured their child. But Kronos felt no remorse, only relief. The prophecy spoke of being overthrown by his child. If he consumed them all, then no child could grow to challenge him. It was perfect logic, the reasoning of a mind twisted by power and fear. When Demeter was born, goddess of the harvest, she too was swallowed. Then came Hera, future queen of the gods, Hades, lord of the underworld, and Poseidon, master of the seas, all devoured by their father the moment they drew their first breath. 5 children, 5 divine beings, with infinite potential, all trapped in the darkness of their father's stomach. Rhea's grief was inconsolable. She had watched her husband consume 5 of their children, and with each one, a part of her died. She could feel them somehow, still alive within Kronos, unable to grow, unable to be free, existing in a state between life and death. When she found herself pregnant with her 6th child, she knew she couldn't bear to lose another. In desperation, she turned to her parents, Gaia and Uranos, seeking their counsel. Despite their estrangement, both were united in their hatred of Kronos and their desire to see him punished for his crimes. The birth of Zeus and the coming storm. Gaia and Uranos advised Rhea to give birth in secret, far from the watchful eyes of Kronos. They told her of a cave on Mount Ida in Crete, hidden and sacred, where the child could be raised in safety. When the time came for the birth, Rhea traveled to Crete under the cover of darkness. In that cave, surrounded by the ancient magic of the earth itself, she gave birth to Zeus, the child who would fulfill the prophecy and reshape the cosmos. But Rhea still had to face Kronos, who would expect to devour this child as he had the others. In a moment of desperate cunning worthy of Kronos himself, she took a stone, roughly the size of an infant, and wrapped it in swaddling clothes. When she returned to Kronos and presented him with the bundle, he didn't even look at it closely. So confident was he in his solution to the prophecy, so routine had the horrible act become, that he simply took what he believed was his sixth child and swallowed the stone whole. The deception was complete. Meanwhile, in the cave on Crete, the infant Zeus was being raised in secrecy. Different versions of the myth tell of different guardians. Some say he was nursed by the goat Amalthea, whose horn would later become the cornucopia, the horn of plenty. Others tell of nymphs who fed him honey and milk. The Curetes, young warriors, danced and clashed their spears against their shields outside the cave, creating a tremendous noise to mask any crying from the infant god. Zeus grew rapidly, as gods do, nourished not just by food but by the knowledge of his destiny and the burning desire to free his siblings and claim his birthright. As Zeus grew to maturity, he developed powers that surpassed even those of the Titans. He could command thunder and lightning, his voice could shake mountains, and his presence radiated an authority that even immortals found compelling. But raw power alone wouldn't be enough to defeat Kronos and the Titans. Zeus would need cunning, allies, and a carefully orchestrated plan. His first ally came in the form of Métis, a daughter of the Titans Oceanus and Tethys, whose name literally meant wisdom or craft. She would later become Zeus's first wife, but for now she was his advisor in the coming revolution. Métis concocted a potion that would cause Kronos to regurgitate everything he had swallowed. Some say it was a mixture of wine and mustard. Others claim it was a special herb known only to the gods. Zeus, disguising himself, managed to become cupbearer to Kronos, earning the Titan king's trust over time. Then, at the perfect moment, he slipped the potion into Kronos' wine. The effect was immediate and violent. Kronos began to convulse, his immortal body rebelling against him. First came the stone, shot from his mouth like a missile, which would later be placed at Delphi as a sacred object, the omphalos, or navel of the world. Then, in reverse order from how they were swallowed, came his children, first Poseidon, then Hades, then Hera, Demeter, and finally Hestia. They emerged fully grown, having somehow matured even within their father's stomach, and they were filled with a rage that had been fermenting for eons. The six siblings stood together for the first time, united by their shared trauma and their desire for vengeance. Zeus quickly established himself as their leader. He was the one who had freed them, after all, and his power was evident to all. But even with his siblings by his side, Zeus knew they couldn't defeat the Titans alone. Kronos had his brothers and sisters, powerful beings who had ruled the cosmos for ages. The young Olympians, as they would come to be called, needed more allies, and Zeus knew exactly where to find them. Deep in Tartarus, the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires remained imprisoned, placed there first by Uranos and kept there by Kronos. Zeus and his brothers undertook a dangerous mission to the underworld, fighting past the dragon Campe, whom Kronos had set as a guard, to free these powerful beings. The Cyclopes, grateful for their freedom after eons of imprisonment, immediately set to work forging weapons for their liberators. For Zeus, they created the thunderbolt, a weapon that could split mountains and incinerate anything it struck. For Poseidon, they forged the trident, which could shake the earth and command the seas. For Hades, they fashioned a cap of invisibility, allowing him to move unseen even among the gods. The Hecatoncheires, with their 100 hands and 50 heads each, pledged themselves to Zeus's cause. Their strength was beyond comprehension. In battle, each could throw 100 mountains at once, creating a bombardment that no defense could withstand. With these allies, the Olympians finally had a force capable of challenging the established order. The Titanomachy, the war that shaped the cosmos. The war that followed, known as the Titanomachy, lasted for 10 long years and was a conflict of such magnitude that it threatened to tear the very cosmos apart. The Titans, led by Kronos, made their stronghold on Mount Othrys, while the Olympians established themselves on Mount Olympus. Between these two peaks, the earth became a battlefield where immortals clashed with powers that mortal minds could barely comprehend. The skies darkened with the smoke of divine combat. Zeus hurled his thunderbolts with such frequency that the air itself seemed to burn. Poseidon struck the earth with his trident, creating earthquakes that toppled mountains and opened great chasms in the ground. The Titan Hyperion answered with the concentrated light of 1,000 suns, trying to blind his opponents. Oceanus flooded vast regions, while the Olympians turned his waters to steam with their fire. Not all the Titans fought against the Olympians. Prometheus, the far-sighted son of Iapetus, could see which way the wind was blowing and sided with Zeus, bringing his brother Epimetheus with him. Themis, goddess of divine law, also joined the Olympians, recognizing in Zeus a more just ruler than Kronos had become. Mnemosyne, memory personified, remained neutral, as did Oceanus and Tethys. These defections and neutralities weakened the Titan cause, but the war still raged on with no clear victor. The turning point came when Zeus fully unleashed the Hekatonchires. These 100-handed giants took position on the peaks surrounding Mount Othrys and began their bombardment. Imagine 3 beings, each with 100 arms, each arm capable of lifting a mountain, all throwing simultaneously. 300 mountains flew through the air at once, then 300 more and 300 more in an endless barrage that made defense impossible. The very landscape was reshaped by this assault, valleys filled, peaks leveled, the geography of the world forever altered. As the Titans reeled from this assault, Zeus seized his moment. He unleashed a thunderbolt of such power that it has no comparison. Ancient sources speak of it as if the entire sky became a single bolt of lightning. The blast struck Mount Othrys directly, shattering the Titan's stronghold and sending them tumbling from their thrones. Kronos fell, his sickle, the same one he had used against Uranos, tumbling from his hand. The symbolism was complete. The weapon of revolution had become useless in the hands of the one overthrown. In the aftermath of victory, Zeus and his siblings had to decide what to do with the defeated Titans. Death was not an option. Immortals cannot truly die. Instead, most of the male Titans who had fought against the Olympians were imprisoned in Tartarus, with the Hekatonchires serving as their eternal guards. The walls of this prison were bronze, and around it flowed the river Styx, whose waters even the gods feared to cross falsely. Kronos was chained in the deepest part of this abyss, far below where even the other Titans were held, condemned to an eternity of imprisonment as dark as the one he had imposed on his siblings within his own stomach. The female Titans were generally treated more leniently, perhaps because they had played lesser roles in the war, or perhaps because the Olympians recognized their value. Rhea was honored as the mother of the gods. Themis became Zeus's advisor and second wife. Mnemosyne bore Zeus the 9 muses. Theia, Phoebe, and Tethys retained positions of respect, if not power. Atlas, the son of Iapetus, received a special punishment. He was condemned to hold up the sky for eternity, standing at the western edge of the world, forever preventing Uranos from reuniting with Gaia. With the Titans defeated, the cosmos needed new leadership, and the 3 male Olympians divided the realms between themselves. They cast lots to determine who would rule what domain. Zeus won the sky and became king of the gods, wielder of thunder and lightning, supreme ruler from his throne on Mount Olympus. Poseidon received the seas, all the waters of the earth, becoming lord of earthquakes and horses as well. Hades drew the shortest lot and received the underworld, becoming the ruler of the dead, master of all the wealth hidden beneath the earth. The earth itself and Mount Olympus were considered common ground, though Zeus's supremacy meant his word carried the most weight in these neutral territories. The 12 Olympians. A new order. With the cosmos now under new management, Zeus set about establishing a pantheon that would rule for millennia to come. The 12 major Olympian gods, though the exact list sometimes varied, generally included Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Hermes, and either Hestia or Dionysus. Each deity controlled specific aspects of existence, from the physical forces of nature to the abstract concepts that governed mortal life. Zeus, as king of the gods, commanded the sky and weather, but his dominion extended far beyond meteorological phenomena. He was the god of justice and law, the protector of guests and strangers, the overseer of oaths and promises. His epithets were numerous. Zeus Xenios protected travelers, Zeus Horkios punished oath-breakers, Zeus Soter was the savior in times of dire need. From his throne on Olympus, he watched over both immortals and mortals, dispensing justice with his thunderbolts and maintaining the cosmic order he had fought to establish. But Zeus was far from a perfect ruler. His insatiable appetite for beautiful women, both mortal and immortal, would become legendary and create endless complications. These affairs would produce numerous children, many of whom would become great heroes or minor deities, but they would also earn him the eternal wrath of his wife, Hera. His rule was marked by both wisdom and caprice, justice and favoritism, showing that even the king of the gods was subject to passion and prejudice. Hera, Zeus's sister and wife, became the queen of the gods and the goddess of marriage and family. An ironic portfolio given her husband's constant infidelities. Her marriage to Zeus was tumultuous from the very beginning. Zeus had courted her for 300 years, but she rejected his advances. Finally, he transformed himself into a bedraggled cuckoo during a storm. When Hera took pity on the bird and held it to her breast to warm it, Zeus revealed himself and, in some versions, forced himself upon her. She married him to cover the shame, but their relationship would never be harmonious. Hera's jealousy became her defining characteristic, and her vengeance against Zeus's lovers and illegitimate children was legendary. She persecuted Leto, mother of Apollo and Artemis, preventing her from finding any land where she could give birth. She drove Heracles mad, causing him to kill his own wife and children. She transformed Io into a cow and set the 100-eyed giant Argus to guard her. Yet, despite her often cruel actions, Hera was widely worshipped, particularly by married women who sought her protection for their unions and families. Her peacock, with its many eyes, became her symbol, representing her watchfulness over marriage vows. Poseidon, lord of the seas, was nearly as powerful as his brother Zeus, and his temperament was equally volatile. With his trident, he could create islands, cause earthquakes, and summon tsunamis that could devastate coastal cities. Sailors prayed to him for safe voyages, offering horses, animals sacred to him despite his aquatic nature, as sacrifices. His palace lay beneath the waves, built of coral and gems, where he lived with his wife Amphitrite and their son Triton. But like Zeus, Poseidon had numerous affairs that produced both divine and monstrous offspring. Poseidon's contests with other gods for patronage of cities became famous. His most well-known competition was with Athena for Athens. He struck the Acropolis with his trident, creating a salt spring, while Athena offered the olive tree. The citizens chose Athena's gift as more valuable, earning Poseidon's enmity. His grudges were legendary. He would pursue vengeance across generations, as Odysseus learned during his 10-year journey home from Troy. Demeter, goddess of the harvest and agriculture, controlled the fertility of the earth. Her power was demonstrated most dramatically in the story of her daughter Persephone's abduction by Hades. When the lord of the underworld seized Persephone to be his queen, Demeter's grief was so profound that she neglected her duties, causing the earth to become barren. Nothing would grow, and humanity faced starvation. This first winter continued until Zeus intervened, arranging for Persephone to spend part of each year with her mother and part with her husband in the underworld. Thus, the Greeks explained the seasons, spring and summer when Persephone was above ground with Demeter, autumn and winter when she returned to Hades. Athena stood apart from the other Olympians due to her unique birth. She sprang fully grown and armored from Zeus's head after he had swallowed her pregnant mother, Metis, fearing a prophecy that Metis would bear children more powerful than himself. Athena became the goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, and crafts. Unlike Ares, who represented the brutal, chaotic aspects of war, Athena embodied tactical thinking and just causes. She was Zeus's favorite child, allowed to use his thunderbolt and aegis, a powerful shield that could terrify enemies. As a virgin goddess, Athena rejected all suitors, focusing instead on helping heroes and protecting cities, particularly Athens, her namesake. She aided Odysseus with her wisdom, guided Perseus in slaying Medusa, and helped Heracles complete his labors. Her symbol, the owl, represented wisdom, while the olive tree she created became a symbol of peace and prosperity. The Parthenon, her great temple in Athens, stood as one of the most magnificent structures of the ancient world, a testament to her importance in Greek culture. Apollo, son of Zeus and the Titaness Leto, was perhaps the most Greek of all the gods, beautiful, talented, and multifaceted. He was the god of music, poetry, prophecy, medicine, and the sun, though Helios was the original sun god. His oracle at Delphi was the most important in the Greek world, where the Pythia, his priestess, would deliver prophecies that could determine the fate of individuals and entire cities. Kings and commoners alike would travel great distances to consult the oracle, bringing rich offerings in hope of favorable prophecies. Apollo's birth was itself an adventure. Hera, jealous of Leto's pregnancy by Zeus, forbade any land from harboring her. Leto wandered the earth in labor until she found Delos, a floating island that technically wasn't land. There, clinging to a palm tree, she gave birth first to Artemis, who then helped deliver her twin brother Apollo. From the moment of his birth, Apollo displayed divine power, immediately calling for a bow and arrows and slaying the serpent Python that Hera had sent to kill Leto. Artemis, Apollo's twin sister, was the goddess of the hunt, the moon, and paradoxically, both virginity and childbirth. She roamed the forests with her band of nymphs, all of whom had sworn vows of chastity. Any man who dared to spy on them or assault them met a terrible fate. The hunter Actaeon, who accidentally saw her bathing, was transformed into a stag and torn apart by his own hunting dogs. Orion, one of the few men she may have loved, was killed either by her own hand due to a trick by Apollo or by a giant scorpion sent by Gaia. Despite her own vow of virginity, Artemis served as the protector of women in childbirth, a role she assumed from the moment she helped deliver her twin brother. Young girls approaching marriageable age would dedicate their toys to her, marking their transition from childhood. Her silver bow and arrows could bring plague or sudden death, but also swift, painless ends to those who had earned her favor. Ares, the god of war, was perhaps the most disliked deity on Olympus. Even his parents, Zeus and Hera, viewed him with distaste. Where Athena represented strategic warfare and just causes, Ares embodied the brutality, bloodlust, and chaos of battle. He delighted in the carnage of war, the screams of the dying, and the clash of bronze on bronze. His companions were his sister Eris, strife, his sons Deimos, terror, and Phobos, fear, and Enyo, goddess of destruction. Despite his fearsome nature, Ares was not invincible. In the Trojan War, the mortal hero Diomedes wounded him with Athena's help, sending him fleeing back to Olympus like a coward. His most famous myth involved his affair with Aphrodite, who was married to Hephaestus. The clever smith god created an invisible net that trapped the lovers in bed, then called all the gods to witness their humiliation. Rather than being ashamed, Ares and Aphrodite's passion for each other only grew stronger, and they had several children together, including Harmonia, who ironically became the goddess of harmony. Aphrodite herself was unique among the Olympians, as she predated them, born from the sea foam created when Kronos threw Uranos's ever-genitals into the sea. She was beauty incarnate, desire personified, and no god or mortal could resist her power when she chose to wield it. Her magic girdle, when worn, made the wearer irresistible. She could inspire love or passion in anyone, leading to both the greatest joys and the most terrible tragedies in mythology. Her marriage to Hephaestus was a mismatch from the start. Some say Zeus arranged it to prevent the gods from fighting over her, choosing the least threatening husband possible. Others claim Hephaestus earned her hand by freeing Hera from a magical throne he had created. Either way, Aphrodite felt no love for the lame smith god and took many lovers, both divine and mortal. Her affair with Ares was the most constant, but she also loved the mortal Anchises, with whom she had Aeneas, the Trojan hero who would survive the war and, according to Roman mythology, go on to found the lineage that would build Rome. Hephaestus, despite being the son of Zeus and Hera, or in some versions, Hera alone, was the only ugly god on Olympus. Born lame, he was thrown from Olympus either by Hera in disgust at his imperfection or by Zeus during an argument. He fell for 9 days and 9 nights, landing either in the sea where sea nymphs raised him or on the island of Lemnos where he set up his first forge. Despite his physical imperfections, or perhaps because of them, Hephaestus became the greatest craftsman among the gods. His forge beneath Mount Etna produced wonders beyond mortal comprehension. Zeus's thunderbolts, Achilles' armor, Pandora herself, and countless other magical items that would shape the course of mythology. Hermes, son of Zeus and the nymph Maia, was born in a cave and showed his divine nature immediately. On his first day of life, he invented the lyre from a tortoise shell, stole Apollo's cattle, and made them walk backwards to confuse their tracks, and then lied about it all with such charm that even Apollo had to laugh. Zeus made him the messenger of the gods, and with his winged sandals and hat, he could travel anywhere in the cosmos instantly. But Hermes was much more than just a messenger. He was the god of thieves, travelers, merchants, and boundaries. He guided souls to the underworld, earning him the title Psychopompos, the soul guide. The 12th Olympian position was contested. Originally, it belonged to Hestia, goddess of the hearth, the oldest of Kronos and Rhea's children and the first to be swallowed. She was the gentlest of the gods, tending the sacred fire on Olympus and maintaining the peace. Every hearth in every home was sacred to her, and every meal began and ended with an offering to Hestia. But she was so quiet, so unassuming, that she barely appears in myths. Eventually, she gave up her throne to Dionysus, preferring to tend the fire rather than participate in the squabbles of Olympus. Dionysus was the youngest of the Olympians and the only one born of a mortal mother, Semele. His birth was extraordinary, even by divine standards. Hera, learning of Zeus's affair with Semele, disguised herself as Semele's nurse and convinced the pregnant woman to ask Zeus to appear before her in his true form. Zeus, having sworn an oath on the river Styx, had to comply. His divine radiance incinerated Semele, but Zeus rescued the unborn child, sewing him into his own thigh until he was ready to be born. Thus, Dionysus was twice born, once from his mother's womb and once from his father's thigh. The creation of humanity and the gift of fire. While the gods established their rule and divided their domains, the earth below remained largely empty of intelligent life. The creation of humanity has several versions in Greek mythology, but the most compelling involves the Titan Prometheus, whose name means forethought. He was the son of Iapetus and was known for his wisdom and his sympathy for lesser beings. Some stories say he shaped the first humans from clay, breathing life into them with Athena's help. Others claim humans emerged from the earth itself, or were created by the gods collectively. Regardless of their origin, what all versions agree upon is that humanity began in a wretched state, little better than animals. These early humans lived in caves, shivering in the cold, eating raw meat, dying from the slightest injury or illness. They had no fire, no tools, no knowledge of agriculture or building. They were at the mercy of wild beasts and the elements, their lives nasty, brutish, and short. The gods on Olympus looked down upon these creatures with a mixture of amusement and disdain. Why should they care about such pathetic beings? What threat could humans ever pose to the immortals? But Prometheus saw something different in humanity. Perhaps it was their potential for growth, their capacity for learning, or simply compassion for their suffering. He decided to help them, teaching them various skills: how to build houses, how to yoke oxen, how to read the stars and seasons. But all of these gifts were limited without the one thing that could truly elevate humanity: fire. Fire was the exclusive property of the gods, burning eternally on Olympus, powering Hephaestus's forge, lighting Apollo's sun chariot. It was the element that separated divine from mortal, civilized from primitive. Prometheus knew that Zeus would never willingly share fire with humanity. The king of the gods wanted mortals to remain weak and dependent, offering sacrifices to the gods, but never threatening their supremacy. So Prometheus decided to steal fire for humanity. The theft itself has been told in various ways. In one version, he snuck into Olympus and took fire from Hephaestus's forge. In another, he lit a fennel stalk from the wheels of Apollo's sun chariot as it passed overhead. The fennel stalk, with its slow-burning pith, could carry fire for a long distance without being extinguished. Hiding the glowing ember within the hollow stalk, Prometheus brought fire down to humanity. The impact was immediate and transformative. With fire, humans could cook their food, making it safer and more nutritious. They could warm themselves through winter nights, pushing back the darkness that had terrified them. They could forge metal tools and weapons, defending themselves against predators and shaping their environment. Fire meant civilization, progress, the first step toward everything humanity would eventually become. When Zeus discovered the theft, his rage was cosmic in scale. Thunder rolled across the heavens for days, and lightning strikes increased 100-fold. It wasn't just the theft that angered him, it was the implications. With fire, humans might eventually develop to the point where they could challenge the gods themselves. Prometheus had given them the seed of divinity, the potential for growth beyond their ordained station. Zeus's punishment for Prometheus was as creative as it was cruel. He had the Titan chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, spread-eagle and exposed to the elements. But that was just the beginning. Each day, an eagle, Zeus's sacred bird, would fly to the rock and tear open Prometheus's belly, devouring his liver. The Greeks believed the liver was the seat of emotions and regeneration. Each night, Prometheus's immortal flesh would heal, his liver regrow, only for the torture to begin again the next day. This cycle would continue for centuries, perhaps millennia, a daily reminder of the price of defying Zeus. But Zeus wasn't satisfied with punishing just Prometheus. Humanity had accepted the stolen gift, and they too must suffer consequences. Zeus commissioned Hephaestus to create a new being, the first woman, as a beautiful evil to plague mankind. This was Pandora, whose name means all gifted, for each god contributed something to her creation. Hephaestus shaped her from clay and gave her form. Athena taught her weaving and dressed her in silver robes. Aphrodite gave her beauty and desire. Hermes gave her a deceitful nature and persuasive words. Each gift was double-edged, designed to make her irresistible but dangerous. Zeus presented Pandora to Epimetheus, whose name means afterthought, Prometheus's brother. Prometheus had warned his brother never to accept any gift from Zeus, but when Epimetheus saw Pandora, he forgot all warnings. Her beauty was overwhelming, her charm irresistible. He took her as his wife, welcoming her into the world of mortals. Pandora brought with her a wedding gift from Zeus, a large jar, what we now call Pandora's box due to a Renaissance mistranslation. Zeus told her it contained special gifts for humanity, but warned her never to open it. Of course, Zeus knew exactly what would happen. He had specifically asked Hermes to give Pandora an insatiably curious nature. The jar sat in Epimetheus's home, and every day Pandora would look at it, wonder about it, find herself drawn to it. Finally, her curiosity overwhelmed her caution. When she was alone, Pandora lifted the lid of the jar just to peek inside. Immediately, a host of evils flew out like a swarm of malevolent spirits: disease, old age, death, famine, war, hatred, envy, and 1,000 other plagues that had never before existed in the world. Pandora slammed the lid shut, but it was too late. The evils had escaped and spread across the earth, ensuring that human life would never again be the paradise it might have been. But one thing remained in the jar: hope. Whether hope remained trapped because Pandora closed the lid too quickly, or whether it stayed deliberately to be preserved for humanity, is debated. Some see it as the cruelest trick of all, that humans would suffer endless evils but never lose hope, thus never accepting their fate and always suffering more from expectation. Others see it as Zeus's one mercy, ensuring that no matter how dark things became, humanity would always have hope to sustain them. The Age of Heroes, Perseus and the Gorgon. With the gods established in their roles and humanity struggling with the evils released from Pandora's jar, we enter the Age of Heroes, that fascinating period in Greek mythology where gods and mortals mingled freely, producing offspring of extraordinary ability who would perform deeds that echoed through eternity. These heroes served as intermediaries between the divine and mortal worlds, possessing enough divine blood to attempt superhuman feats, but enough humanity to be relatable to those who heard their stories. The first of the great heroes we'll explore is Perseus, whose story begins, as so many Greek myths do, with a prophecy and an attempt to avoid fate. King Acrisius of Argos desperately wanted a male heir, but the oracle at Delphi told him he would have no sons, and worse, that his daughter's son would kill him. Acrisius had one daughter, Danae, renowned for her beauty. To prevent the prophecy, he imprisoned her in a bronze tower or underground chamber, depending on the version, where no man could reach her. But Acrisius hadn't counted on Zeus. The king of the gods saw Danae and desired her, and no bronze tower could keep Zeus out. He transformed himself into a shower of gold that poured through the roof and into Danae's chamber. From this union, Perseus was born. When Acrisius discovered his daughter had somehow had a child, he was terrified but couldn't bring himself to kill them directly. That would bring the wrath of the gods. Instead, he sealed mother and child in a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, leaving their fate to the elements. The chest washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, where a kindly fisherman named Dictys found them and took them in. Perseus grew up strong and brave, protective of his mother. But their peaceful life was shattered when Dictys's brother, King Polydectes, became obsessed with Danae. Perseus stood as the only obstacle to the king's desires, so Polydectes devised a plan to get rid of him. He announced he was collecting horses as a bride price for another woman, and when Perseus, who had no horses, rashly promised to bring him anything else instead, Polydectes immediately demanded the head of Medusa. Medusa was one of the 3 Gorgon sisters, monsters with snakes for hair. Bronze claws, and most terrifyingly, faces so horrible that anyone who looked directly at them turned instantly to stone. Of the three sisters, only Medusa was mortal, though that hardly made the task easier. She lived at the edge of the world, surrounded by the stone statues of those who had tried to kill her before. It seemed like a death sentence, which was exactly what Polydectes intended. But Perseus had divine blood, and the gods took notice of his plight. Athena appeared to him first, explaining that she had her own grudge against Medusa. In some versions, Medusa had once been a beautiful priestess in Athena's temple who was violated by Poseidon in the sacred space. Athena, unable to punish Poseidon directly, transformed Medusa into a monster as either punishment or protection, depending on interpretation. Athena gave Perseus her polished bronze shield, explaining that he could look at Medusa's reflection in it without turning to stone. Hermes appeared next, giving Perseus winged sandals that would allow him to fly, a sickle of adamantine sharp enough to cut through Medusa's scales, and a special bag to carry the head. He also told Perseus he would need to visit the Graeae, the Grey Sisters, to learn Medusa's location. The Graeae were ancient crones who shared one eye and one tooth between them, passing them around to see and eat. Perseus found them and stole their eye as they were passing it, refusing to return it until they told him how to find Medusa and revealed the location of the Hesperides, nymphs who guarded special items he would need. From the Hesperides, Perseus received Hades' cap of invisibility, which would allow him to escape after killing Medusa. Now, fully equipped, he flew to the Gorgons' lair at the edge of the world. He found them sleeping, and, using Athena's shield as a mirror to guide his hand, he beheaded Medusa with one stroke of the sickle. From her severed neck sprang two children of her union with Poseidon, Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a giant bearing a golden sword. Perseus quickly placed Medusa's head in the special bag and put on the cap of invisibility just as the other two Gorgons woke. They shrieked and searched for their sister's killer, but couldn't find him. Perseus flew away on his winged sandals, carrying one of the most dangerous weapons in mythology, a head that could still turn people to stone even in death. On his way home, Perseus had several adventures. Flying over Ethiopia, he saw a beautiful woman chained to a rock by the sea. This was Andromeda, whose mother had boasted that her daughter was more beautiful than the sea nymphs. Poseidon, offended on behalf of the nymphs, sent a sea monster to ravage the coast, and an oracle declared that only sacrificing Andromeda would appease the god. Perseus fell in love at first sight and made a deal with her parents. He would save her in exchange for her hand in marriage. Using Medusa's head, he turned the sea monster to stone and claimed his bride. When Perseus finally returned to Seriphos, he found that Polydectes had been harassing his mother in his absence, forcing her to take refuge in a temple. Perseus went straight to the palace, where Polydectes was feasting with his supporters. The king mocked Perseus, claiming he had failed in his quest. Perseus responded by pulling out Medusa's head, turning Polydectes and his entire court to stone. He made Dictys, the kind fisherman who had saved them, the new king of the island. Eventually, Perseus accidentally fulfilled the prophecy about his grandfather. While competing in athletic games in Larissa, his discus was blown off course by the wind and struck an old man in the crowd, killing him instantly. That man was Acrisius, who had been traveling in disguise to avoid his prophesied death. The prophecy, as always in Greek mythology, proved inescapable. Theseus and the Labyrinth. Our next hero, Theseus, was the great hero of Athens, and his story is intricately connected with the rise of that city as a major power. His conception was unusual even by mythological standards. His mother Aethra was visited in one night by both Poseidon and King Aegeus of Athens, making Theseus the son of both a god and a mortal king. Before leaving, Aegeus hid his sandals and sword under a heavy rock, telling Aethra that when their son was strong enough to lift it, he should come to Athens to claim his birthright. Theseus grew up in Troezen with his mother, and when he came of age and lifted the rock, he decided to travel to Athens by land rather than the safer sea route. This was his first heroic choice. The land route was infested with bandits and monsters, but Theseus wanted to prove himself. Along the way, he encountered and defeated 6 challengers, each a villain who had been terrorizing travelers. He killed Periphetes, the club-bearer, and took his bronze club. He tied Sinis, the pine-bender, between 2 bent pines and let them tear him apart, just as Sinis had done to countless victims. He kicked Siron off a cliff to be eaten by a giant turtle, as Siren had done to travelers. He out-wrestled Cercion. He killed Procrustes on his own infamous bed that he used to stretch or cut travelers to fit. And finally, he killed the Crommyonian sow, a monstrous pig ravaging the countryside. When Theseus arrived in Athens, he didn't immediately reveal himself to Aegeus. The king had married the sorceress Medea, the same one who had helped Jason obtain the Golden Fleece, and she recognized Theseus through her magic. Seeing him as a threat to her own son's inheritance, she convinced Aegeus that this young stranger was dangerous and should be poisoned. At the feast, just as Theseus was about to drink the poisoned wine, he drew his sword to cut his meat, the sword Aegeus had left under the rock. The king recognized it immediately and dashed the cup from his son's lips. Medea fled Athens, and Theseus was acknowledged as the heir. But Athens was under a terrible curse. Years earlier, King Minos of Crete's son had died while visiting Athens, and in revenge, Minos had waged war on the city. The war ended with Athens agreeing to send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete every 7 or 9 years as tribute. These youths were fed to the Minotaur, a monster with the head of a bull and the body of a man, who lived in an elaborate labyrinth beneath Minos's palace. The Minotaur's existence was the result of a complex divine punishment. Minos had prayed to Poseidon for a sign of divine favor, and the god sent a beautiful white bull from the sea with the understanding that Minos would sacrifice it back to him. But the bull was so magnificent that Minos kept it and sacrificed a different one instead. In punishment, Poseidon made Minos' wife Pasiphae fall in love with the bull. She had the craftsman Daedalus build her a hollow wooden cow so she could mate with it, and the Minotaur was the monstrous result. Minos, ashamed, had Daedalus build the labyrinth to imprison the creature. When the time came for Athens to send its 3rd tribute, Theseus volunteered to go as one of the 7 young men, intending to kill the Minotaur and end the tribute forever. His father begged him not to go, but Theseus was determined. They agreed that if Theseus succeeded, he would change his ship's black sails to white on the return journey so Aegeus would know he lived. In Crete, Princess Ariadne, Minos' daughter, fell in love with Theseus the moment she saw him. She couldn't bear the thought of him dying in the labyrinth, so she sought help from Daedalus, the labyrinth's designer. He gave her a ball of thread and told her to have Theseus tie one end at the entrance and unwind it as he went deeper so he could find his way back out. Ariadne gave Theseus the thread along with a sword, extracting a promise that he would marry her and take her away from Crete. Theseus entered the labyrinth, unwinding the thread as he navigated the confusing passages. Deep in the maze, he found the Minotaur. Some versions say he killed it with the sword Ariadne gave him, others that he used his bare hands, beating the monster with its own horn. Either way, he succeeded where all previous victims had failed, then followed the thread back to the entrance. He gathered the other Athenian youths and fled to their ship with Ariadne. But the story takes a dark turn here. The ship stopped at the island of Naxos, and when they departed, Ariadne was left behind. Some versions say Theseus abandoned her deliberately, either because he was already married, or because Athena told him to, or simply because he was faithless. Others say Dionysus appeared and demanded Ariadne for himself, and Theseus had no choice. Still others claim she was seasick and went ashore to recover, and the ship was blown away by a storm. Whatever the truth, Ariadne was abandoned on Naxos, where Dionysus found her, fell in love with her, and made her his immortal bride. The tragedy continued when Theseus approached Athens. In his excitement or grief over Ariadne, he forgot to change the black sails to white. King Aegeus, watching from the Acropolis, saw the black sails and believed his son was dead. In despair, he threw himself from the cliff into the sea, which thereafter was called the Aegean Sea in his memory. Theseus thus became king of Athens through the tragic fulfillment of his heroic quest. Heracles, the greatest Greek hero. No discussion of Greek heroes would be complete without extensive attention to Heracles, known to the Romans as Hercules, the most celebrated hero in all of Greek mythology. His story is one of incredible strength, terrible tragedy, and ultimately, redemption through suffering. Unlike many heroes who had one great adventure, Heracles' entire life was a series of extraordinary challenges, culminating in his deification, the only hero to become a full god. Heracles was the product of Zeus's most audacious seduction. Zeus desired Alcmene, the wife of Amphitryon, a general who was away at war. Zeus took Amphitryon's form and visited Alcmene. But to maximize his pleasure, he made the night last 3 times its normal length by commanding the sun not to rise. When the real Amphitryon returned the next day, Alcmene was confused by his passionate advances, saying they had just made love the night before. Amphitryon consulted the prophet Tiresias, who revealed Zeus's deception. 9 months later, Alcmene gave birth to twins, Heracles, son of Zeus, and Iphicles, son of Amphitryon. From the moment of his conception, Heracles was persecuted by Hera, whose jealousy of Zeus's infidelities was legendary. On the day Heracles was to be born, Zeus boasted that a descendant of Perseus born that day would rule over all around him. Hera, seeing an opportunity, caused Eurystheus, another descendant of Perseus, to be born prematurely while delaying Heracles' birth. Thus, Eurystheus became king of Tiryns and Mycenae, and would later have power over Heracles. When Heracles was just 8 months old, Hera sent 2 giant serpents to kill him in his cradle. Baby Iphicles screamed in terror, but Heracles grabbed 1 snake in each hand and strangled them, playing with their bodies like toys. This was the first sign of his incredible strength that would only grow as he matured. Heracles received the finest education available. Amphitryon taught him to drive a chariot, Autolycus instructed him in wrestling, Eurytus taught archery, and Linus, brother of Orpheus, tried to teach him music. But Heracles' strength and temper were poorly suited to the lyre. When Linus struck him for playing badly, Heracles hit back with the instrument, killing his teacher instantly. This incident showed the dangerous side of his strength. Power without control could be deadly, even when harm wasn't intended. As a young man, Heracles faced a symbolic choice that would define his character. While tending cattle, he was approached by 2 women. One, representing vice, was beautiful and seductive, offering him a life of ease and pleasure. The other, representing virtue, was noble and serious, offering a life of struggle that would lead to glory. Heracles chose virtue, accepting that his path would be difficult but meaningful. His first major exploit was saving Thebes from paying tribute to the city of Orchomenus. Single-handedly, he defeated the Orchomenian army, and in gratitude, King Creon of Thebes gave him his daughter, Megara, in marriage. They had several children. The number varies from 3 to 8, depending on the source. And for a time, Heracles lived happily as a hero of Thebes. But Hera's hatred hadn't diminished. She sent madness upon Heracles, and in his deranged state, he saw his children as enemies. He killed them all, and in some versions, Megara as well, shooting them with the arrows that never missed their mark. When the madness lifted and he saw what he had done, Heracles was overwhelmed with grief and guilt. He contemplated suicide, but his friend Theseus convinced him that living with the guilt required more courage than dying. Seeking purification and penance, Heracles consulted the oracle at Delphi. The oracle, influenced by Hera, told him he must serve his cousin Eurystheus, the king of Tiryns, for 12 years and perform whatever labors were demanded of him. If he succeeded, he would be purified and granted immortality. Thus began the famous 12 labors of Heracles, though originally there were only 10. Eurystheus would discount 2 of them and add 2 more. The first labor was to kill the Nemean lion, a monster whose golden hide was impervious to weapons. Heracles discovered his arrows bounced off, his sword bent, and his club shattered against the beast. Finally, he wrestled it with his bare hands, strangling it in a grip from which there was no escape. He used the lion's own claws to skin it and thereafter wore the pelter's armor, with the head serving as a helmet. The second labor was to kill the Lernaean Hydra, a serpentine monster with multiple heads. The number varies from 5 to 100 depending on the source. The central head was immortal, and whenever Heracles cut off one of the other heads, 2 grew back in its place. Heracles enlisted his nephew Iolaus to help, having him cauterize each neck stump with a torch immediately after decapitation. The immortal head he cut off and buried under a huge rock. Before leaving, he dipped his arrows in the Hydra's poisonous blood, making them deadly to anyone they even scratched. Eurystheus, however, discounted this labor because Heracles had received help. The third labor was to capture the Ceryneian hind, a deer sacred to Artemis with golden antlers and bronze hooves that could run faster than an arrow. Heracles pursued it for a full year, finally capturing it when it stopped to drink. Artemis was furious that he had taken her sacred animal, but when Heracles explained his servitude and promised to release it after showing it to Eurystheus, she relented. The fourth labor was to capture the Erymanthian boar alive. On his way, Heracles stopped with the centaur Pholos, who opened a jar of wine that belonged to all centaurs. The scent attracted the other centaurs, who attacked in fury. Heracles killed many with his poisoned arrows, including, accidentally, his old teacher Chiron, the wisest and most just of the centaurs. Eventually, he drove the boar into deep snow, where it couldn't run, and brought it back to Eurystheus, who was so terrified he hid in a bronze jar he had prepared for such occasions. The fifth labor was to clean the Augean stables in a single day. King Augeas owned thousands of cattle, and their stables hadn't been cleaned in decades. The task seemed impossible, designed to humiliate the hero with menial work. But Heracles diverted 2 rivers to flow through the stables, washing them clean instantly. Eurystheus discounted this labor too, claiming Heracles had been paid for it when Augeas promised him 1/10 of his cattle if he succeeded. The sixth labor was to drive away the Stymphalian birds, man-eating birds with bronze beaks, metallic feathers they could shoot like arrows, and toxic dung. They had multiplied until they darkened the sky over Lake Stymphalus. Athena helped Heracles by giving him a rattle made by Hephaestus. The noise frightened the birds into the air, where Heracles shot many with his arrows and scared the rest away permanently. The Trojan War, the epic that defined an age. The Trojan War stands as perhaps the most famous conflict in all of mythology, a 10-year siege that involved nearly every hero of the age and whose consequences rippled through generations. The war's origins, like so many Greek myths, can be traced back to the gods and their petty jealousies, showing how divine conflicts inevitably spilled over into the mortal world with catastrophic results. The seeds of the war were planted at a wedding feast. Peleus, a mortal hero, was marrying Thetis, a sea nymph. Their son would be Achilles, the greatest warrior of the age. But that comes later. All the gods were invited to the wedding except Eris, the goddess of strife and discord. Furious at being excluded, she arrived anyway and threw into the feast a golden apple inscribed with the words, "To the fairest." 3 goddesses immediately claimed it: Hera, queen of the gods; Athena, goddess of wisdom and war; and Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. Zeus, wise enough not to get involved in this dispute himself, appointed Paris, a prince of Troy, as judge. Paris was living as a shepherd at the time, unaware of his royal heritage. His parents, King Priam and Queen Hecuba of Troy, had abandoned him as an infant because of a prophecy that he would cause Troy's destruction. Each goddess tried to bribe Paris. Hera offered him rule over all Asia and Europe. Athena offered wisdom and skill in war. Aphrodite offered the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Aphrodite. The most beautiful woman in the world was Helen of Sparta, daughter of Zeus and Leda. Her beauty was so extraordinary that when she came of age, nearly every prince and king in Greece sought her hand. Her stepfather, fearing violence would break out among the suitors, made them all swear an oath before Helen chose her husband. They promised to defend her marriage and come to her husband's aid if anyone tried to steal her away. Helen married Menelaus, who became king of Sparta. When Paris came to Sparta on a diplomatic mission, Aphrodite made Helen fall in love with him. While Menelaus was away attending a funeral, Paris and Helen fled to Troy, taking substantial treasure with them. Some versions say Helen went willingly, driven by divine love. Others claim she was abducted. Either way, her departure triggered the oath all her former suitors had sworn. Menelaus called upon all of Greece to honor their vow and help him recover his wife. The Greek force that assembled was the greatest armada the world had ever seen, over 1,000 ships carrying the finest warriors of the age. The supreme commander was Agamemnon, king of Mycenae and Menelaus's brother, the most powerful ruler in Greece. Among the heroes were Odysseus, the clever king of Ithaca, Ajax the Greater, a giant of a man, and second only to Achilles in fighting prowess. Diomedes, young but fearless, old Nestor, wise counselor, and many others. Two crucial figures initially tried to avoid the war. Odysseus, warned by an oracle that he wouldn't return home for 20 years if he went, feigned madness when the recruiters arrived. He yoked a horse and an ox together and started sowing his fields with salt. But Palamedes placed Odysseus's infant son, Telemachus, in front of the plow. And when Odysseus swerved to avoid him, his sanity was proven. Achilles' mother, Thetis, knowing her son would die if he went to Troy, disguised him as a girl and hid him among the daughters of King Lycomedes. Odysseus, now committed to the war, exposed him by placing weapons among gifts for the princesses. While the real girls admired jewelry, Achilles instinctively grabbed a sword, revealing himself. The Greek fleet gathered at Aulis, but they couldn't sail. The winds were against them. The prophet Calchas revealed that Artemis was angry because Agamemnon had boasted he was a better hunter than the goddess herself. To appease her and gain favorable winds, Agamemnon had to sacrifice his daughter, Iphigenia. He lured her to Aulis with the promise of marriage to Achilles, then sacrificed her on the altar. Some versions say Artemis rescued her at the last moment, substituting a deer, but Agamemnon believed he had killed his own child. The winds changed, but the price of the war's first blood would haunt Agamemnon forever. The siege of Troy lasted 9 years with little progress. Troy's walls, built by Poseidon and Apollo themselves, were impregnable. The Greeks raided the surrounding countryside for supplies and captured several cities allied to Troy, but the main city held firm. The Trojans, led by Prince Hector, Priam's eldest son and their greatest warrior, occasionally sallied forth for battles on the plain. But neither side could gain a decisive advantage. The Iliad, Homer's great epic, focuses on a critical period in the 10th year of the war. It begins with a quarrel between Agamemnon and Achilles. Agamemnon had taken Chryseis, daughter of a priest of Apollo, as a prize. When her father came to ransom her, Agamemnon refused rudely. Apollo sent a plague upon the Greek camp, and Agamemnon was forced to return the girl. To compensate for his loss, he took Achilles' prize, a woman named Briseis. Achilles, furious at this insult to his honor, withdrew from the fighting along with his myrmidons, his personal troops. Without Achilles, the Greeks struggled. Hector and the Trojans pushed them back to their ships, nearly achieving victory. The Greek heroes fought valiantly. Diomedes even wounded the gods Aphrodite and Ares when they intervened in the fighting, but they couldn't match Hector without Achilles. Agamemnon sent an embassy offering to return Briseis and give vast additional treasures, but Achilles' pride kept him in his tent. The situation became so desperate that Patroclus, Achilles' beloved companion, whether friend or lover is debated, begged to wear Achilles' armor and lead the Myrmidons. Achilles agreed, but warned him only to drive the Trojans from the ships, not to pursue them to Troy. Patroclus, however, got caught up in the heat of battle and chased the Trojans all the way to their walls. There, Apollo knocked him senseless, and Hector killed him, stripping Achilles' armor from the body. When Achilles learned of Patroclus' death, his grief and rage were cosmic. His cry of anguish was heard by his mother Thetis in the depths of the sea. He wanted to fight immediately, but he had no armor. Thetis went to Hephaestus, who worked through the night to create new armor, including a magnificent shield decorated with scenes of war and peace, representing the entire cosmos. The next morning, Achilles returned to battle with one purpose: to kill Hector. The Trojans fled before Achilles' wrath. He filled the river Scamander with so many corpses that the river god himself rose up to fight him. Finally, Hector alone stood before the gates of Troy to face him. At the last moment, Hector's courage failed, and he ran, with Achilles pursuing him 3 times around the city walls. Finally, Athena tricked Hector by appearing as his brother Deiphobus, encouraging him to stand and fight. When Hector turned to his brother for a spare spear, no one was there. He realized he had been deceived and faced his death with courage. Achilles killed Hector with a spear thrust to the throat, in the one spot his armor didn't cover. As he died, Hector prophesied that Achilles would soon follow him to death. Achilles, in his rage, dishonored the body, dragging it behind his chariot around Troy's walls and back to the Greek camp. For 11 days, he continued to abuse the corpse, dragging it around Patroclus' funeral pyre, though Apollo preserved it from decay. On the 12th night, King Priam, guided by Hermes, came secretly to Achilles' tent. The old king kissed the hands that had killed his son and begged for Hector's body. This scene, one of the most moving in all literature, shows Achilles remembering his own father and his own mortality. He returned Hector's body and granted a 12-day truce for the funeral. The Iliad ends with Hector's funeral, but the war continued. Achilles didn't survive long after Hector. As prophesied, he was killed by Paris, of all people, the man who had started the war, but was considered a coward and poor warrior. Apollo guided Paris's arrow to Achilles' only vulnerable spot, his heel, where his mother had held him when she dipped him in the river Styx as a baby to make him invulnerable. Thus died the greatest warrior of the age, brought down by the least worthy opponent. After Achilles' death, his armor was to be awarded to the greatest remaining Greek warrior. Ajax and Odysseus both claimed it. When the Greeks awarded it to Odysseus, Ajax went mad with rage and humiliation. In his madness, he slaughtered a flock of sheep, thinking they were the Greek leaders who had dishonored him. When he came to his senses and saw what he had done, he fell on his sword in shame. Still, Troy wouldn't fall. The Greeks learned from the prophet Helenus, a son of Priam whom Odysseus captured, that Troy would only fall if certain conditions were met. They needed Philoctetes, whom they had abandoned on an island years earlier because of a festering wound, because he possessed Heracles' bow and arrows. They needed Neoptolemus, Achilles' young son. And they needed to steal the Palladium, a sacred statue of Athena that protected Troy. All these conditions were met, but Troy still stood. Finally, Odysseus devised the stratagem that would end the war, the Trojan horse. The Greeks built an enormous wooden horse, hollow inside, and filled it with their best warriors. The rest of the army burned their camp and sailed away, hiding behind a nearby island. The Trojans found the horse with an inscription dedicating it to Athena for a safe return home. One Greek, Sinon, had been left behind and told the Trojans a carefully crafted lie. The Greeks had given up and gone home, leaving the horse as an offering to Athena. If the Trojans brought it into their city, they would gain Athena's favor. The Trojans debated fiercely. Cassandra, Priam's daughter, who had the gift of prophecy but the curse of never being believed, warned that the horse would bring destruction. Laocoon, a priest, famously said, "I fear Greeks, even bearing gifts," and threw a spear at the horse. But Poseidon, favoring the Greeks, sent sea serpents that killed Laocoon and his sons, which the Trojans interpreted as punishment for sacrilege. They pulled the horse into the city, even dismantling part of their wall to fit it through. That night, the Trojans celebrated their apparent victory. When they finally slept, drunk on wine and exhausted from celebration, Sinon released the Greeks from the horse. They opened the gates for the returned army, and Troy was sacked with tremendous brutality. Priam was killed at the altar of Zeus by Neoptolemus. Cassandra was dragged from Athena's temple and later given to Agamemnon as a prize. Hector's infant son Astyanax was thrown from the walls to prevent him from growing up to avenge his father. The city was burned to the ground, ending the mighty civilization that had stood for generations. Helen was returned to Menelaus. Despite all the death and destruction caused by her departure, when Menelaus saw her beauty again, he couldn't bring himself to kill her as he had planned. They returned to Sparta and, according to some versions, lived together peacefully for many years. The surviving Trojan women were distributed among the Greek leaders as slaves. The great city of Troy was no more, its destruction so complete that for millennia, people believed it was only a myth until Heinrich Schliemann's archaeological discoveries in the 19th century. The returns and the legacy. The Greek victory at Troy came at a terrible price, and the gods ensured that many of the victors wouldn't enjoy their triumph. The returns home, called the nostoi in Greek, were often as eventful as the war itself. Agamemnon returned home to find his wife Clytemnestra had taken a lover, Aegisthus. She had never forgiven Agamemnon for sacrificing their daughter Iphigenia. Together, they murdered Agamemnon in his bath, along with Cassandra, whom he had brought home as a concubine. Years later, Agamemnon's son Orestes would avenge his father by killing his mother, pursued afterward by the Furies for the crime of matricide. Menelaus and Helen were blown off course to Egypt, where they spent 7 years before finally reaching Sparta. Diomedes returned to find his wife had been unfaithful and his throne usurped. He sailed to Italy, where he founded several cities. Many of the lesser heroes were shipwrecked, killed by their wives' lovers, or exiled from their kingdoms. The gods had not forgotten the Greeks' impious behavior during the sack of Troy, particularly Ajax the Lesser's violation of Cassandra in Athena's temple. But the most famous return story is that of Odysseus, told in Homer's Odyssey. His journey home to Ithaca took 10 years, during which he faced monsters, divine temptations, and natural disasters. He encountered the Cyclops Polyphemus, whom he blinded, earning Poseidon's enmity; Circe, the witch who turned his men into pigs; the Sirens, whose irresistible song lured sailors to their deaths; Scylla and Charybdis, the monster and whirlpool that guarded a crucial strait; and Calypso, the nymph who held him captive for 7 years. Meanwhile, in Ithaca, suitors had overrun his palace, consuming his wealth and pressuring his wife Penelope to remarry. Penelope remained faithful, using various tricks to delay choosing a new husband, most famously weaving a burial shroud for Odysseus's father during the day and unraveling it at night. When Odysseus finally reached home, disguised as a beggar by Athena, he and his son Telemachus slaughtered all the suitors in a bloody climax that restored order to his household. The Trojan War cycle represents the end of the heroic age in Greek mythology. After this great conflict, the interactions between gods and mortals became less frequent, the heroes less magnificent. The world moved toward the historical period, where humans had to face their challenges without direct divine intervention or the strength of demigods. The stories served multiple purposes for the Greeks. They were entertainment, certainly, but also moral instruction, religious education, and cultural identity. Every Greek city-state could point to heroes in these stories as their founders or ancestors, connecting themselves to this glorious past. Conclusion: the eternal flame of Greek mythology. As we reach the end of our journey through Greek mythology, from the primordial void of chaos to the fall of Troy and beyond, we can see how these stories form a complete narrative of cosmic and human development. They begin with the raw forces of nature, personified as the first gods, move through the establishment of divine order under the Olympians, explore the creation and struggles of humanity, and culminate in the age of heroes whose deeds bridge the gap between divine and mortal worlds. These myths addressed fundamental questions that humans have always asked. How did the world begin? Why do we suffer? What is our purpose? How should we behave? What happens after death? The Greeks answered these questions not through abstract philosophy initially, but through stories of gods and heroes whose adventures illustrated moral principles and natural phenomena. When thunder rolled across the sky, it wasn't just an electrical discharge, it was Zeus expressing his will. When spring came after winter, it wasn't just axial tilt and solar radiation, it was Persephone returning to her mother. The influence of Greek mythology on Western civilization cannot be overstated. Our language is filled with references to these stories. We speak of Achilles' heels, Trojan horses, Herculean tasks, and Pandora's boxes. Our constellations bear Greek names and tell Greek stories. Our literature, from Shakespeare to Harry Potter, draws on patterns and archetypes established in Greek myth. The hero's journey, identified by Joseph Campbell, finds its earliest and perhaps purest expressions in stories of Perseus, Theseus, and Heracles. Modern psychology owes much to Greek mythology. Freud named fundamental psychological complexes after Greek myths: the Oedipus complex, the Electra complex, narcissism from Narcissus. Jung's archetypes draw heavily on mythological figures. We understand ourselves partly through the lens these ancient stories provide, recognizing universal human experiences in tales told 3,000 years ago. But perhaps the most important legacy of Greek mythology is its humanization of the divine and deification of the human. The Greek gods were not distant, perfect beings, but personalities with recognizable emotions and flaws. They could be petty, jealous, cruel, and unfair, but also loving, just, and protective. This made them relatable even as it made them dangerous. Humans in Greek mythology weren't just pawns, but actors with agency, capable of greatness and tragedy, able to challenge gods and occasionally win. The heroes showed that mortals could transcend their limitations through courage, cleverness, and determination. Perseus used divine tools, but his own bravery to slay Medusa. Odysseus survived through wit as much as strength. Even Heracles, the strongest man who ever lived, completed his labors through intelligence as often as muscle. These stories told the Greeks, and tell us still, that humans are capable of extraordinary things, even in the face of overwhelming odds or divine opposition. The tragic elements in Greek mythology, the inescapability of fate, the price of hubris, the suffering that comes from knowledge, speak to existential truths that remain relevant. Oedipus couldn't escape his fate despite all efforts. Icarus flew too close to the sun despite warnings. Pandora opened the box despite prohibition. These stories warn us about the dangers of overreach while acknowledging that such overreach is fundamentally human. Greek mythology also presents a complex view of justice and morality. The gods could be cruel and arbitrary, but there was usually an underlying logic to their actions, even if it wasn't always fair by human standards. Actions had consequences that could ripple through generations. The curse on the house of Atreus, for example, stemmed from Tantalus serving his son as a meal to the gods, and played out through multiple generations of murder, cannibalism, and revenge, culminating in Orestes' matricide and eventual absolution. The role of women in Greek mythology is complex and often problematic by modern standards, reflecting the patriarchal society that created these stories. Yet within those constraints, we find powerful female figures. Athena was the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. Artemis was a fierce protector of her independence. Hera, despite being often portrayed as a jealous wife, was the powerful queen of heaven. Mortal women like Penelope showed cleverness and loyalty. Medea demonstrated that a woman scorned could be more terrifying than any monster. Cassandra possessed the gift of prophecy, even if she bore the curse of not being believed. As we look at these stories from our modern perspective, we can see both their limitations and their lasting insights. They emerged from a specific cultural context, ancient Greece with its particular social structures, values, and worldview. Yet they speak to universal human experiences: love and loss, pride and humiliation, justice and revenge, courage and cowardice, the search for meaning and the fear of death. Today, Greek mythology continues to evolve and find new expressions. Modern authors retell these stories from different perspectives, giving voice to characters who were silent in the original versions. Films and television series reimagine these tales for contemporary audiences. Video games allow players to interact with mythological worlds. Each generation finds new meanings in these ancient stories, proof of their continued relevance and power. As we close this exploration of Greek mythology, remember that these stories were never meant to be museum pieces, frozen in time. They were living narratives that evolved with each telling, adapted to new audiences and new circumstances. They survived because they spoke to something fundamental in human nature, something that transcends time and culture. Whether we read them as religious texts, literary works, psychological studies, or simple entertainment, they continue to offer insights into what it means to be human in a universe that often seems ruled by forces beyond our control or understanding. The flame that Prometheus stole for humanity wasn't just literal fire. It was the spark of consciousness, creativity, and culture that makes us human. These myths are part of that flame, passed down through generations, illuminating the darkness with stories that help us understand ourselves and our place in the cosmos. From chaos to cosmos, from titans to Olympians, from gods to heroes, to ordinary humans, Greek mythology charts a path of development that mirrors our own journey from unconsciousness to awareness, from nature to culture, from chaos to order, and sometimes back again. So as you go to sleep tonight, perhaps you'll dream of winged horses and golden fleeces, of heroes battling monsters and gods walking among mortals. Perhaps you'll see in your dreams the wine-dark sea that Homer sang about, or Mount Olympus rising above the clouds, or the depths of Tartarus where the Titans remain chained. These images have populated human dreams for 3 millennia, and they'll continue to do so as long as humans tell stories, seek meaning, and strive to understand the beautiful, terrible, magnificent mystery of existence. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the complete history of Greek mythology. If you've enjoyed exploring these ancient stories and want to dive deeper into the myths, legends, and histories of our past, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Like this video if it has transported you to the world of gods and heroes, and share it with anyone who might enjoy discovering the incredible stories that have shaped Western civilization. Until next time, may your dreams be filled with wonder, and may you wake with the strength of Heracles, the wisdom of Athena, and the cleverness of Odysseus. Good night and sweet dreams.